All right. Thanks for tuning in to our talk today on aligning go-to-market teams in a product-led funnel. Really excited to have you here, and we'll include a ton of information on how to get in touch. If you have any questions about what we're going to be discussing today, please feel free to reach out. I'm always more than happy to answer any question or to provide more details or anything of the sort. But let's jump right into it. So. Today we live in this world where we're seeing really a dramatic digitalization of the work life. And I think, COVID hasn't necessarily helped bring it back to real life, where we're even seeing, what we expected to be in-person events turn into digital events with speakers pre-recording their talks. But I think, overall, this does represent a terrific opportunity for product-led companies to thrive, and we're actually seeing them succeed really well. I think, a lot of people were talking about how Zoom was doing really great with people working more from home. And I think there's just a ton of, collaboration tools. I think of a Miro or things like that are really working really well. And so what I wanted to cover today is some of the learnings and best practices that I've seen implemented at, product-led growth leaders. If you think of companies like Slack, Invision, Intercom, and what I've seen them implement to really align their go-to-market resources was opportunities that they were able to find in the funnel. And we'll dive into how you can replicate some of those, starting tomorrow or even today, or how potentially, they could open your mind and maybe like inspire your strategy, even if you're not necessarily a product-led organization. So I think among the probably like, all the questions that I typically get from product-led go-to-market leaders around like, what they should be thinking about and struggles that they might have. I think probably the three most common questions I hear are, what should my North Star be? Like, there's so many possibilities for like that number that you want to pick to align all your teams and make sure that they work in the same direction, as well as, do I really need a sales team, or is the need for a sales team representative of a product that is not perfect yet and therefore that doesn't just sell itself? And finally, I think, a question I hear often is like, how long should my trial be? Because there's always this question of, if I make it shorter, am I going to get money faster, but am I going to decrease my conversion rate and kind of hit my business negatively on the long run? So we'll cover those today. And probably a couple more things that are nuanced along the way. For those who don't know me, kind of my creds here. So I'm the co-founder of MadKudu, and my background is initially in data science, but I then turned to the dark side of sales and marketing, where I've just had a blast leveraging, my capabilities of playing with numbers to really figure out what could be done differently and just doing pattern matching. And I've been fortunate, over the past few years to work with some amazing companies out there, not only to, just help them, but also learn a lot from them. And it's, to be perfectly honest, it's been fascinating just to see how when you actually get to, peek behind a curtain, you realize that behind the scenes, things are a lot messier than what you read on TechCrunch. And even though, there are a lot of, when you read an article on TechCrunch or, Growth Hacker, or any of those platforms, I think it's really important to ask yourself, why did someone take the time to write that article? And very often, I don't mean to say that people are disingenuine, but, there's like probably like a marketing reason behind it, either like recruiting or trying to, promote the brand. And so therefore it's, very often not a perfect representation of reality. And, I'm here also because I want to promote the fact that there is a lot of value in using data to fight misconceptions and to actually build a better, go-to-market alignment. And that's why I'm here. So there's also a reason for that. And I'm going to be pushing that agenda. But anyway, just been awesome to work with a lot of these companies, and hopefully, there'll be a lot of learnings that I can share down, back to you folks, and that you can use to improve the alignment within your teams. But without, further ado, let's just jump right into it, with the question of like, what North Star metric should you use? And, I think looking at, the variety of potential North Stars that are out there, what we typically see, of course, is that you know, product heavy teams are going to be focused on like the typical activation, you know, daily active users, weekly active users. And then on the marketing side, there's generally a focus on how many signups can we generate within a given month. And then sales is going to be like comped on how much pipeline they're able to generate or to close based on what kind of sales team we're talking about. I think monetization is definitely something that's interesting because I've seen, it's probably the one goal that I've seen be allocated, you know, to marketing or sales or product a little bit differently, whereas the other ones are typically more of a, it's like pretty one-to-one, right? Product is going to own activation, marketing owns signups, and then sales is going to really own that kind of like pipeline close. But yeah, so there's just like a lot of different possibilities, and there's always a question of which one should you pick. And there's really that idea of like, you know, how lagging should your indicator be? Should it be at the very top or at the very bottom? So like either it's just activation or it's at conversion. And I think one of the potential misconceptions or errors I would say that I see behind this is that there's almost an assumption that the journey and the onboarding journey or the customer journey is very linear and it's like very deterministic of, you know, a given set of causes are going to lead to the same consequence, and potentially even that you know, the absence of a cause is going to prevent that consequence. And therefore there's this kind of idea that the only way to get to paying customers to make sure that, you know, a new sign up is going to activate the product, they're going to see value for the first time, and then they're going to get recurring value from the product, and at some point they're going to get so much recurring value that they're going to be willing to, you know, go over that threshold and start paying. I think this is like oversimplistic, and it misses the, you know, the nuance and something that we see in the data where there's actually quite a few people that, you know, sign up and actually go all the way to becoming a paying customer without, you know, before I would say activating. It's not that they never activate, it's that they potentially don't activate the account before they actually become a paying customer. You see this with like people who, you know they want to use this CRM, and they'll actually buy the CRM before they start loading their contact list. Whereas if someone is really running an evaluation, they're typically going to sign up for the product, load a bunch of contacts, see how the CRM works, like see if they're comfortable with it before they actually start paying. Additionally, there's another group of users that we typically see where for them kind of the success event is actually generating new signups. So this person is going to, again, like let's say sign up for a CRM, but instead of like going to the payment step, they might just invite their team members, and their team members are going to be the ones who activate the product. And so what I'm trying to show here is that the idea that there's like a single concept of a North Star, I think is actually detrimental to businesses because it's an oversimplification of the complexity of the B2B journey in product led or in anything, you know, in any kind of funnel. And one of the things that we've done to really illustrate this challenge and to illustrate the, I guess, like inherent complexity to B2B sales and to B2B onboarding is for our customers, one of the things that we look at is if we take different types of personas, we're going to look at historical conversion rates to paid and historical activation rates of different types of users. And so if we take this particular example, what we found was that, you know, marketers for this product tended to activate at a higher rate than average. However, they converted at a lower rate. So if you think of a CRM, again, to take that example, they would sign up and they would load, you know, contacts into their database, but they actually bought at the end of the trial less frequently than the average person. In comparison, what we were seeing was that, you know, product managers would actually be converting at a higher rate and activating at a similar rate than the marketers. But then there was a complete outlier, I would say, or seemed like an outlier, which was like CEOs and we'll talk about like executives, but CEOs would very, very rarely activate the product, but they very often were the person who would swipe the credit card for the account. And so, you know, once we start mapping kind of all these different personas, and in this case, we're just using job title to make it, you know, simple to understand. What was really interesting was to see that they were kind of like these two clusters of different users that were identified, where you had your kind of like core users, like people who were going to activate the product, they were going to get value from the product, but not necessarily the ones who were buying. And on the flip side, actually, you had your buyers. Like these were the folks that were more likely to swipe the credit card, but potentially were less likely to activate the product. And this is analysis that I highly, highly recommend you run internally. And why I'm saying this is because, again, like typically I've seen companies operate where the product team is going to use activation as the North Star for everything trial related. And then go to market is really going to be looking at conversion. And the thing is, different signups might have different kind of inclinations and affinities, if you will, to those North Stars. And it doesn't necessarily make sense for product to try and push CEOs to activate more. At the same time, it doesn't necessarily make sense to try and get marketers to pay more. But it's rather like understanding the lay of the land and understanding that you might want to tier differently the goals for the different people that are signing up for your product. And kind of the way we look at this and the way we've implemented this for a lot of our customers, like if you think of like tiering goals for your different users from the most important one, the one you really want to push to kind of like the next fallbacks, I would say if you think of a core user, really the goal and the thing you want to drive them to do is to get value from the product as quickly as possible. So like really hitting that activation as soon as possible. Whereas when you have a buyer sign up, you might actually want to push them to talk to someone, like get on to get an overview call. And if you don't necessarily have a sales team or you're not willing to do this kind of like salesy element or CTA, then we'd actually recommend like inviting new team members to the application so that those new members fall into the core user group and are actually going to start activating the product. And then you want to default for that buyer to say, hey, here are, here's the value of actually using our premium products. So why you should pay after the trial or why you should upgrade to the premium tier and why this is going to be valuable for your team. Versus for the core user, it's really about like, here's how you're going to get value from the product. Socialize this within the team because you do want to have that viral loop of, your users becoming people that refer the product to other users. And then at the very end, maybe like swiping the credit card once they've gotten enough value. And you see that those are users that are on that typical journey from like sign up to conversion through activation and engagement. And to give you an example of maybe what this can look like, here's an example of campaigns that we ran with Cloud App around 2017. And so 2 different signups. One of them is an account executive, so really kind of a core user, whereas the other person is a CEO, so more of that buyer persona. For the core user, the main focus of the email is about how they can get value from the product and how they can share something visually with Cloud App, which is a screencasting tool. And so really, yeah, like how to have images like speak louder than words. Whereas for the buyer, the focus is really on this call to action of like, let's hop on a call to like be able to show you the premium value and like really get you to understand why you should invite more team members. And again, re-emphasizing an emphasis at the end on why this is actually going to help your team be more efficient. And like here are links to kind of help justify why you should bring more folks on the platform. So this is something that, it's a, tested and tried technique like over and over again. And we consistently see really high incremental conversion rates and success rates, like both from an adoption standpoint and a conversion standpoint. It's all about being relevant. I think in today's world, like relevance is king more than anything else. And so whenever you build your process to be relevant and drive people in a direction that's actually going to be helpful and meaningful, you are going to be winning. And so maybe to give you a sense of like how to build this is how when we built this with for a segment, this is how they actually instrumented it. So they had the website, everything was flowing into Segment, which operated really as the CDP. They had MadKudu running that kind of segmentation and classification of, which categories people would fall into. And then pulling data for personalization from Salesforce. So, do we know this person? Are they a customer? If so, we're going to mention things differently. Then Clearbit for a lot of the firmographic information, and Datanyze, which was particularly relevant for Segment because they wanted to personalize the email based on the tech stack of the person. And then they ran the emails through Drift, but like a Customer IO or even Marketo or HubSpot are great tools to do this. But really the idea was that, push all the information into some kind of data repository that's connected to your marketing automation platform, ideally also to your CRM if your reps are going to be sending emails, so that you can run these different campaigns based on personas that you've identified previously. And so going back to the question of, what should your North Star be when you're in the go-to-market team, I think my recommendation, just based on what I've seen, is that it should be a heavy focus on monetization with a kind of secondary goal or an assist on the engagement and retention metrics, which are typically going to be more owned by product or CS organizations. And I would really, really recommend, taking a look at this matrix of, affinity to activating the product and affinity to converting, because I think it just opens your eyes to the fact that not all users are created equal, and not all users should be expected to have the same journey towards conversion. And I think that's why there's really value in having a core focus on monetization and helping align with that by saying, like, there is a reason why we're aligning on monetization. It is the fact that we know there are people that will typically buy rather than activate. And I think that's where, salespeople actually do potentially add a lot of value, which brings me to, I guess, like the second question that I wanted to talk about today is, do I really need a sales team? I hear often people think about this, maybe like, I guess like people with less experience, I would say, think that having a sales team is a sign that your product is just not good enough to sell itself. But if your product is good enough to sell itself, then you probably don't need a sales team. And I think this is a pretty common, product-led myth. And I think it's rooted in all these articles that I was mentioning, like the Growth Hackers and, TechCrunch and all that good stuff, where you read articles about how Atlassian grew to $1 billion business without a sales team, or how Slack didn't have a sales team. There's just like so many of these companies that say they don't have a sales team, and it just like generates these very seductive but actually false patterns of like, hey, look at us, we're just publishing developer documentation, and then hooray, revenue is falling from the sky because, our product is so awesome that people just buy it. Or you have people just like, upfront tell you that they don't have a sales team. And I think this is really, really appealing. If you think of the psychology behind it, I think it's very appealing to, founders that are on the product-led side, where they typically have a stronger inclination towards engineering. And so there's this common and unfortunately false, I would say, representation of salespeople that, originated in part from TV shows, like the idea that we have of these like, car salespeople, as well as the fact that, as again, this might be a cliche, but just like talking like average, overall, in engineering, we tend to be a little bit more introverts, and so we have kind of a personal predilection towards, I wish I could just sell from behind my computer by shipping a product that is so delightful that people will be willing to pay me money, rather than having to interact with another human being and do small talk, get to know them, get to understand their problem, and then try to sell them something, like ask for money, which is just like hard. And it just feels like, something that when you look at successful salespeople, it seems to be like the jocks from college that, would be able to sell ice to an Eskimo. And I think these are just like very bad misconceptions around salespeople. Like, good salespeople are first and foremost helpful. They understand what their prospect is trying to do, and they deliver a meaningful and helpful sales cycle that is actually meant to make the prospect better. And the cute thing is that none of the companies I mentioned before, have that misconception. And when you actually look at it, they might say they don't have salespeople, but when you go onto LinkedIn and you start digging, you actually realize that they all have salespeople. They just call them maybe something different, but trust me, they have salespeople. And um, and so um, yeah, not just a misconception. It also, we also see from the data that salespeople do have a positive impact on conversion. Our good friend Thomas Tungus at Redpoint Venture ran a survey where he asked a bunch of folks to respond, like what was their unassisted conversion rate, what was their conversion rate, what was their trial length, just a bunch of questions around the product led funnel. And what he found was that there was like typically a 300% increase in conversion rate when salespeople were there to assist the conversion. And more interestingly, not just like, overall did we see that increase was also visible across all ACVs. So even on the very low end spectrum, what we were seeing was that for companies that had an ACV of, like even like, 5K or less, there was still a huge increase in conversion rate when salespeople were able to assist. And so, all of these companies, the Slacks, the Invisions, actually Invision doesn't say they don't have sales team, but yeah, Slack, Atlassian, all of those, they actually do have a sales team. And, we've worked with them to help them actually figure out which lead to pass on to the sales team to make sure that the sales team was like, targeting the right kind of people and leveraging their time to the best of their capabilities. So don't fall for those falsehoods. I highly recommend having a sales team. And over time I've tried to figure out like why is this misconception so prevalent in our world that we don't necessarily need a sales team and that the product should help. And I think it heavily comes from the fact that the B2B journey has like started to look more and more like B2C. And I think this consumerization has led people to say, oh, people just want to self-serve. And I think that's wrong on multiple levels. I think the first and probably most fundamental level is that even in the B2C world, I don't think people necessarily want to self-serve all the time. And the reason I think we have this assumption is that we have this dogma in our society where we believe that maximizing choice is what will result in maximizing freedom and therefore in maximizing happiness. Like we want to set our own rules. We want to, create our own pizza toppings and we want to make our own pizza and we don't want to have to pick from a list. And while I think that might be true, I think there are often cases where, too much choice actually leads to unhappiness. And this is something that was made famous by Barry Schwartz in like that he called the paradox of choice, where his point was that when you have too many options, it actually becomes stressful because you don't know which option is going to be the best and you have to live with the decision for the rest of your life. So if we take an example of it, like pizza toppings are pretty straightforward, right? Like there's not going to be a lasting impact if you pick the wrong pizza toppings. Unfortunately, you're not going to like your pizza that night, but that's, fair enough. Lesson learned. Next time you'll pick something different. But if you think of self-serve in the context of healthcare, right? If you go see your doctor and your doctor just like gives you a myriad of options, that's the last thing you want to do, because then you feel like you have to go and do a ton of research on all the options, what they entail, what's the potential success rate. And if for some reason things don't end, in the most optimal way, then you are left with the guilt of having picked the wrong solution and having made a potentially not educated enough guess. And this is something that we see in the B2B world where, the MarTech landscape today is just so crowded. There's just so many options that people don't know how to do the right research to be able to pick the right solution. There's just hundreds of email service providers and marketing automation platforms and CRMs, and which one is the best? Nobody knows. And that's why today I think we're reverting back to word of mouth, and marketers talk amongst each others to figure out like what one or the other recommends, because there's just like an overwhelming choice. And at the end of the day, people want, you know, the choice to be made simpler, and they want it, you know, to have an easy recommendation as to what to pick. And when we look into it, this is also something that we're seeing on the B2C side. And I think a terrific example is YouTube, right? YouTube is the perfect illustration of how abundance of choice can actually be overwhelming. Like there's billions of videos on YouTube. If you didn't have a recommendation system and you had to search by yourself what you wanted to look for, most people would, you know, just log into the platform, stare at a blank search engine and just go away because they wouldn't know what to look for. And so what we're seeing, and I think this number is telling, right? Today, 70% of the time that people spend on YouTube is spent on watching videos that were recommended to them by the algorithm. And sure, it says something about how good the algorithm is, but I think it also says something about the psychology of human beings. Like we just don't want to be making decisions constantly. And there are cases where we want the decision to be made for us, and we want to be provided the right kind of information to, you know, just have a journey that is less, you know, full of friction than if we had to do research constantly to find what to do. So I think that's like a compelling case for saying that, again, the role of a sales rep in a product-led funnel is to help people understand how to use the product, because they might not themselves be able to understand what is the optimal way to use the product. So the rep is really there to help as an expert recommend, the same way that YouTube recommends like the right videos based on your past usage. And I hear a lot of folks will say to this, well, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I understand why I need to use sales reps, but the truth of the matter is that I'm generating tens of thousands of signups per month. You know, the capacity that needed to, you know, reach out to all these people is just ginormous. And if I were to hire salespeople to talk to all of them, it would just be crippling to my business, and the cost alone would probably put me out of business. So there's just no way I can do this. So, you know, what is the right way to do that? Should I just have my reps, you know, wait at the cash register towards the end of a trial and, you know, go and try and convert more people? That seems kind of counterintuitive. And that's right. And I think one of the things that we spend a lot of time analyzing is there are some people where a sales rep is going to be helpful, drive a conversion. There are other people where, you know, having a salesperson is not going to yield any increment. And so these are results, what I'm displaying here, results from a large A/B test that we actually ran with Gusto, which is a payroll provider that has like all the self-serve options as well as sales assisted options. And we ran this like long-term analysis where we broke, you know, the populations into a test group where we stopped having reps reach out to that population, and the control group was the group where reps would keep on reaching out to them. And what we found was that there's, you know, what we call like good fit leads, so people that could get value from the product and might have like a little bit higher needs. That group actually saw a significant improvement in conversion rate when reps were reaching out to them. But there was about 60 or 70% of the population where having a rep reach out to them barely had any kind of impact on their conversion, because those folks were, you know, not looking for anything super fancy. And so the product was, you know, really well designed to drive them through that activation, engagement, conversion. And having a rep was not yielding that much more outcome. So it's really interesting to see that reps are not helpful if they're just going to, you know, handhold people through the activation and engagement, if they're handholding someone who typically already has a high propensity to activate, which goes back to that analysis we mentioned previously. And so I guess the conclusion here is a little bit nuanced, but do I need a sales team? Absolutely. You absolutely need a sales team, and it should start by, you know, founders, and then, you know, having a sales, and then hiring an actual formal sales team. I think though the role of the sales team, in my opinion, or where I've seen the highest success, should be having them be pathfinders. So people who can help customers with maybe more complex needs navigate through the journey. And I think Blake Bartley from OpenView had an awesome analogy where he was saying the pathfinders that help you climb Mount Everest are only there at base camp. So someone has to bring you to base camp. Then once you're there, the pathfinder is going to be the person that leads you to the top. And I think in his idea was like, you want your reps to talk to people that already have activated, and you want to help them see even more value so that they convert. Where I would add a bit of nuance is I think that misses a huge portion of the population, which are people that don't necessarily make it to base camp because they don't even think that climbing Mount Everest is interesting to them, and you still want to have reps talk to them. The analogy that I use, which I think is maybe a little bit more fitting, is if you think of a fashion store. There are multiple places where you could have your sales rep. You could have them at the cash register so that whenever someone is about to check out with the clothes they decided to buy, you can try and upsell them. That's going to work fairly well, right? Because these people have really high intent. They already have selected items they want to buy. It's fairly straightforward to increase the average order value by 10%. But then you could also think of having your reps kind of walk across the aisles looking for people that seem to have, a deep enough pocket based on, how they're acting, how they look, on the products they're looking at, but seem like they don't really know where to start. Because again, speaking for myself, I don't know what kind of jeans to buy for myself or my body type or whatnot. So having a rep walk up to me and help me pick the right kind of clothes is actually likely to yield a difference from me not walking into a store and then walking out just like overwhelmed by the choices versus actually buying something and feeling like they were helpful. And that, I think, is the next level of reps in a product like funnel. It's really figuring out who are the people that have like strong potential for the product, but are going to need that help to understand how they're going to get value from the product. And again, it all boils down to your reps are going to be extremely successful as long as they are relevant in making the experience better. But anyway, that's that on sales teams. And so maybe jumping into the last section, which will be a little bit shorter, but it is a question that I hear all the time of like, is there any data to support a trial length being better than another? Because there's just like a ton of different options out there from like, 7 days, 14 days, 30 days kind of being the norm, but also like freemium. And I would recommend, reading Wes Bush's book on, product-led funnels, where he does discuss like if freemium is better than a trial or not, based on your business, based on the complexity of the product and all of that. But, focusing just on the trial lengths, one of the analyses that we ran was we picked a set of 10 completely different companies in B2B SaaS that had different trial lengths, and we looked at how quickly people typically converted to paid, and we represented that by normalizing it to the day of the sign up. And I guess like the first really interesting learning was that regardless of the length of the trial, 80% of conversions happened within 40 days. And so what we're seeing here is that there's like one company that had a 30-day trial, another one that had a 14-day trial, another one actually that had a freemium model. And for all three of them, 40% of the conversions for that specific cohort happened after 40 days. I think we see it more obviously on the 30-day trial, but this was like an S kind of shape that we saw very often. There was like that very steep increase in the percentage of conversions that happened at the end of the trial, which essentially was telling us that, people buy because they have that like trial end incentive. And so I guess the learning and the recommendation that we ran with a couple of our customers was actually A/B test the length of your trial, because this is very likely going to yield a faster payback, where you're going to see, if you have a 14-day trial or even a 21-day trial versus your 30-day trial, that steep increase in conversion is actually going to be pushed a little bit earlier, but the overall conversion rate isn't going to change by that much. And true story on this, Pipedrive actually ended up A/B testing with us their trial lengths, and at the time they decided to go with a 14-day trial instead of the 30-day trial that they had, because they realized that there was barely any impact on the overall conversion rate, but they reached a much faster payback which is like really important when you're operating in high volumes of signups. And yeah, getting to that payback metric is just really important. But again, I think testing is essential here, and feel free to offer to extend your trial. This is something that I've seen work over and over again, of making the trial 14 days, but after 14 days, having an automated email, either from a sales rep or even automated from the marketing team, offering to extend the trial if people just like click here, or if they reply to the email, which is like, again, like an interesting way to start the conversation with the prospect by being helpful. You're saying, hey, I've seen you get value from the product. I want to make sure you get as much time as you need before you make that decision to buy. So here's me reaching out to you to offer some value, offering to extend the trial. And that's something that just, it's test and tried. It just really works well. So I've added links here. If you want to dive deeper into it, we have the full analysis that we ran on the trial lens. As I mentioned, like Thomas Tungus from Redpoint also ran a survey based on these learnings, and added a little more of a like, what is the impact of sales, and kind of take on the whole analysis. But that's it for me today. I hope this was insightful, that you learned something. Please do feel free to reach out to me. This is my email address, francis@madkudu.com, or ping me on Twitter. Any mention of this being helpful is highly appreciated. Feel free to visit our blog at MadKudu. We try to have a very data-driven blog to help people understand what's going on in the underlying data, and not just what people are saying is happening. So yeah, that's it for me. I really hope this was helpful, and I look forward to hearing from you.